welcome you all to the public hearing for the 2023 to 2042 Minnesota State Highway Investment Plan, or MnSHIP. My name is Jean Wallace. I'm MnDOT's Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer. And I want to start out by saying that the 2023 to 2042 MnSHIP update is a result of almost 3 years of collaboration with the public, with stakeholders, and our partners. Engagement involved more than 3,000 interactions with Minnesotans, and I want to start by thanking everyone who participated in the development of this plan. Today's hearing is just one opportunity to provide comments on the draft plan. In addition to public testimony today, we are accepting written comments online and via email through November 8th. Before we begin the public testimony portion of the hearing, Brad Utek, just on my right here, the Investment Planning Director and lead staff for the update of MnSHIP, will give a brief presentation about the draft plan. Brad.
All right, thanks, Jean. So here to give some background on the plan, just to give you some framework, if you haven't taken a look at it yet, of what the plan involves, why it's important, and kind of what's included in the draft plan. So we're here talking about the 20-year Minnesota State Highway Investment Plan. We use the shorthand MnSHIP to talk about that plan. It directs capital funding for state highways in Minnesota. So we're talking about interstates, U.S. highways, and Minnesota state highways. That's almost 12,000 miles of highways in the state. It is a 20-year plan. It's also fiscally constrained, so we have to identify how much money we're going to have and how to spend that money over the next 20 years based on our anticipating funding sources. One other thing to note, this plan doesn't have specific investments or specific projects in it. It is 20 years for 12,000 miles of state highway. That'd be very difficult to do, to identify individual projects that far out. So we're talking about investments by category, not by specific projects. So those are things like pavement, bridge, safety, mobility, pedestrian, bicycle, that type of investment. This plan is also part of the Minnesota Go family of plans. You may have heard of the Minnesota Go Vision or the statewide multimodal transportation plan. This plan fits within that framework as well. So why does MnSHIP matter? MnSHIP investment direction guides the planning of projects and improvements on the state highway system. That chart on the right there shows how all the plans and the vision fit together. It starts at the top with the Minnesota Go 50-year vision. We have the statewide multimodal transportation plan that was completed at the end of 2022. That's our policy document, if you're familiar with that document. We have the 20-year MnSHIP here that follows that policy guidance. And then there's a pretty direct line from the MnSHIP plan down to the 10-year capital highway investment plan, which are the regional documents that identify projects. And then the 4-year state transportation improvement program, or the area transportation improvement program. And then there's a direct line through that to construction. So there's a pretty direct line from the MnSHIP investment direction to what gets constructed on state highways in Minnesota. This draft plan covers the years 2023 through 2042. The first program year to use the new investment direction is in 2028. We don't change the STIP or the ATIP. That's the program of projects over the next 4 years. So that's using the old investment direction from the last plan. This investment direction really starts at the end of the current 4-year program in 2028. And then once adopting, this plan will replace the 2018 through 2037 MnSHIP document that's currently in place. As Jean mentioned, this has been a long process. We started at the end of 2020. This process has involved hundreds of MnDOT staff, stakeholders from throughout the state, as well as public engagement. We had multiple public engagement periods, one on different investment scenarios, also had feedback on the draft investment direction in early 2023 that really led to the creation of the final investment direction as part of the draft plan here. So long process with a lot of coordination with our partners and the public throughout the state. As I mentioned before, one of the steps of this process is to identify how much money we think we're going to have. This chart shows our revenue sources for this plan. On the left, we have the state funding sources, the state gas tax. registration tax and fees, also known as your vehicle tabs, motor vehicle sales tax, and then there are some general fund transfers as well from the state. We also have federal funding from the federal fuel tax and general fund transfers. This plan does include the new money from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and it does also include the additional revenue we got from the 2023 legislative session. So those two funding sources go through our funding buckets here, and then when we're talking about MnSHIP on the right, we're really talking about state road construction. So these are construction projects throughout the state. MnDOT also has operations maintenance, think snowplow drivers, people filling potholes, that sort of thing. That is not covered in this plan, but that's also where MnDOT spends money as well. So when we take all those revenue sources, project them out 20 years, we think we're going to have about $36.7 billion over the next 20 years. With the adjustments from the 2023 legislative session, that's about $5.2 billion more than we thought before that session. So that made a pretty big jump in our revenue from the additional revenue from the 2023 legislative session. As I mentioned before, the plan's really about investment categories, investment by category, not specific projects. These are the categories that are included in the plan. I won't talk about each of them individually, but I'll kind of talk about them by groups. So the system stewardship, those green categories there, that's really investments to maintain and replace our existing infrastructure. So pavements, bridges, roadside infrastructure, which is basically everything else on our roadway system, and then rest areas, sort of existing infrastructure, repairing and replacing that. The blue categories, critical connections, are improving how people and goods move along and across our system, either in a vehicle, in a truck, walking or biking. We have a few newer objective areas here: climate action and healthy, equitable communities. Climate action, we have climate resilience investments to address our changing climate in the state. And then healthy, equitable communities, we have local partnerships, programs that we coordinate with our local partners, and then main streets, urban pavements, where state highways are, main streets are major urban corridors and kind of act differently than our rural high-speed state highways. One other step of the process is identifying how much need we have on the state highway system. So taking those investment categories on the last slide, identifying our performance targets for a lot of them and how much money it would cost to meet those performance targets over 20 years, we identify the needs across that 12,000 miles of state highway. The needs identified through MnDOT staff were up to $57 billion over the next 20 years. As I mentioned before, our revenue is $36.7 billion. So we're projecting a funding gap of between 15 and 20 billion. The long-term impact of the 2023 legislative session changes the gap by about 20%. So it reduced the gap by about 20% with that new revenue we got in 2023. You may be asking why there's a range on that gap. The low end of the estimated need reflects Minnesota successfully achieving targets for reducing per capita VMT, vehicle miles traveled. That was adopted as part of the multimodal transportation plan. So MnDOT's identified up to $57 billion in need on the state highway system. In addition to the needs identified by us, cities and counties have also identified needs on our system. And we surveyed all the cities and counties throughout the state, our MPO partners, to identify how much need they have beyond our investment. And there was $5 to $6 billion in priority investments on the state highway system. That is above and beyond the $57 billion. So with a lot of input and a lot of work, this is our investment direction we have for public comment. This shows the $36.7 billion by category. A lot of numbers here, really large. We have a lot of investment over the next 20 years. So instead of just talking about the dollar amounts, we want to talk a little bit about the themes we have for our investment direction, which are on the next few slides here. So here are 4 MnSHIP investment direction themes. These are either the focus of our investment or sort of newer focuses that we want to highlight as part of this investment direction. And I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail on the next few slides. The first theme is invest to maintain the existing system. About 60% of investments towards maintaining the existing system. Those are the sort of green categories that we talked about earlier. One difference in this investment direction versus the last plan is bridge condition investment is increased to manage our bridge needs and risks. That allows us to meet targets for bridges on the national highway system and nearly meet targets on the non-NHS. Our end of plan outcomes for pavement are about 30 to 40% better than they were at the end of the last plan. So that reflects our additional funding that we have, that we're able to do more pavement projects, and our long-term outcomes are looking much better than they were at the end of the 2017 plan. Our next theme, improve mobility, accessibility, and safety for all. This is sort of an expansion of what we've currently been doing in areas of ADA, pedestrian safety, and other investments. So we have increased funding in ADA compliance by 2037. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're looking to be compliant with that on our sidewalks, curb ramps, and signals. We're also looking to address ADA compliance issues on our pedestrian bridges, multi-use trails, and rest areas. These are either along or across state highway right-of-way. We also increased funding for safety. We are addressing pedestrian bicyclist network gaps and safety improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. On the mobility side, more on the vehicle side, focusing on traffic management, localized mobility safety improvements, and in the metro area here, adding easy pass lanes. We're looking to continue to invest in freight mobility, safety, first last mile improvements. We have additional investment also for truck parking at rest areas, which is a need identified by our freight partners. And then where we can invest in transit supportive investments, things like bus only shoulders and ramps, and improvements around transit stops on state highways. Our next theme, begin to adapt to a changing future. When we're talking about a changing future here, we're really talking about two things, changing climate and changing technology. On the climate side, we're looking to invest in climate resilience projects to prevent flooding, erosion, and highway weather-related disruptions throughout the state. We're also looking to add or improve green infrastructure along state highways. These are things like shade trees, rain gardens, native plantings, and other natural stormwater filtration systems. These would be primarily in our urban areas. And then on the technology side, continue to do what we're currently doing, invest in traffic cameras, dynamic message signs, signal connectivity, and expanding the fiber network, having a more robust system there. And then also looking at pilot programs to invest in roadway improvements to integrate with changing vehicle technology, things like automated vehicles once they hit our roadways to make sure our system works for them. And last but not least, our last theme here, focus on communities and livability. We have a program in the investment direction here to make livability improvements. These are things such as reuse of underbridge areas for community spaces, where there's an elevated highway, better lighting and aesthetics, smaller cap or stitch projects to improve connections between communities divided by state highways. Those are usually over state highways. Basically improvements to make the state highway a better neighbor for people who live next door or nearby to the state highway. We're also looking to invest in local priorities, locally led projects, and economic development opportunities on state highways through continued funding of the local partnership program and the Transportation Economic Development Program. Both those programs currently exist. We're continuing funding for those through the 20 years of the plan. And I mentioned before, we have that Main Streets Urban Payments category. We are providing funding for urban reconstruction projects to provide more opportunities to address local priorities and concerns. Those are locations where the state highway is either a main street in greater Minnesota or a larger urban corridor in the Twin Cities here, where there are local priorities above and beyond the MnDot infrastructure priorities. We have additional funding to do more holistic projects there. And then finally, we have set aside funding to leverage grants and solicitations outside of MnSHIP funding. So things such as the federal RAISE grant program, Met Council regional solicitation, grants and solicitations that partially fund state highway projects. We have some money dedicated to partner on those projects as well. So as mentioned, we are currently in public comment period right now. You can provide public comments at this hearing if you want to do a formal public comment. You can also submit comments by November 8th via email at stateplans.dot@state.mn.us. You can mail them to us. We also have the plan available at minnesotago.org. You can submit comments on that website while reading the plan. We do have paper copies of comments too, if you're more comfortable writing down a comment. And we do have copies of the plan too, if you want to peruse the plan during the public comment period. So with that, we'll turn it over to Philip to talk about the public hearing rules and process, and then go to the public comment period.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Schaffner. I'm the Director of MnDOT's Office of Transportation System Management, and we're going to move into the public testimony portion of this hearing. Just quickly, we've asked that if you have not already signed in, there's a sign-in sheet here that also would indicate whether you're interested in providing testimony today. For those who do testify, we ask that you identify yourself before you start your comments, and if you're with or representing a group, what that group is. And then we ask that you limit your testimony to about 5 minutes or less. Again, additional comments in writing are welcome. And really the purpose of today's hearing is to gather testimony, so we will not be responding to comments at this time during this hearing, but we will be documenting all comments, posting all comments, and posting responses to all comments at the end of the public comment period. And after we hear from everyone who wishes to testify today, we will close the public hearing testimony portion, and then we have some poster boards outside, and we will kind of move into an open house format for questions and discussion in a more informal context. So with that, on the sign-up sheet, nobody has indicated an interest in testifying, but I will ask now to see if anybody would like to provide testimony. Please step forward.
Anyone else? Just me. All right.
Yeah.
I'll only hear what you say.
Yeah. So please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Brian Martinson. I'm a resident of St. Paul. I didn't prepare today because I didn't prepare any comments, and I have only just been reading through a couple of the parts of this plan as I've been between the tab meeting and this one here. So I apologize if my comments are not completely well informed. But I've been looking at the development of investment direction and the investment direction chapters, and let me set the context by noting that the governor of the state has recently approved, so the executive branch is supportive of reducing vehicle miles traveled in the state and committing to renewable energy sources at a level that is going to require serious action on the part of a lot of agencies in the state, not least of which is MnDOT. In the document, I see what the priorities are, and I see what the investment directions are going to be, and I don't see any discussion of how the investments in the transportation system, as they're planned, are going to continue the level of car dependence on single occupancy motor vehicles that we've had for the last 70 years in this country. I don't see how those investments are going to help us reduce vehicle miles traveled in absolute terms, nor in per capita terms, which is, I know, the preferred MnDOT metric for that. I don't see how it's going to help us reduce greenhouse gases, and it feels like there's just an enormous disconnect between the role that our transportation system plays in driving climate disruption, not just responding to it in terms of being more resilient to the effects of climate disruption. That feels to me like a huge missed opportunity for a 20-year vision document. So that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you. there anyone else who wishes to provide testimony at this time? All right, then we will close the public testimony portion of this and turn it back over to Jean Wallace with concluding remarks.
Thank you, Philip. And before we wrap up, I just want to give you an overview of the next steps. I know Brad covered this, but I'll cover it again. So the MnSHIP public comment period closes on November 8th. Please note that in addition to this hearing, comments will be accepted through November 8th online at minnesotago.org, via email or by mail. After November 8th, we'll be reviewing all the comments received during the public comment period, updating the plan, and responding to those comments. We anticipate the adopted version of the 2023 to 2042 MnSHIP will be posted online toward the end of this year or early in 2024. And a summary of today's testimony and comments made throughout the public comment period, along with MnDOT's response, will also be posted at that time. So with that, we'll close the public hearing and we'll remain here for informal discussion and questions and answers. Thank you.